The concept of the spring rotation planner, whether you're measuring grass and budgeting it, which we would be recommending, but the simplest way is probably to start with the spring rotation planner, so that the target would be to have a third of the farm grazed by the 1st of March. So simply just divide up your farm into a third for the 1st of March, 2/3 by the 17th of March by Paddy's Day, and then the aim is to graze out the balance then to the end of the first week of April, or it's going to be later, 10 or 14 days later on heavier farms.
Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With many farms in the thick of calving, Dairy Advisor Kay O'Connell joins us to address priority tasks from supporting cow and calf health to setting up the farm for the grazing season of 2024.
Well, Emma-Louise, it's similar to the national level. There's a low level of covers done. I know Mike Egan would have discussed that, what pasture base have so far, but of those that have measured in the last couple of weeks, the average farm cover is around 925. So it is higher than what the national figure is. Being the southeast, I suppose that we tend to have had a good back end. But like anything, there's a range within that, down as 600 up to well over the thousands. So I suppose there is plenty of grass. We had the cold snap there for a couple of days, but it doesn't seem to have caused much damage in terms of or senescence in terms of quality of grass. But there is nice cover of grass, and it's primed and ready for getting cows out.
And then in relation to growth over winter, of the farmers, you're talking about a range of 600 to in excess of 1,000 kilos of grass. But I suppose, closed well, there was lots of grass on farm in the autumn. But what sort of growth did we see kind of in the month of December and into January?
Yeah, they're averaging around 5. Some guys got higher than that. One man in particular reckoned he had 10 kilos of growth, which was very high. You'll see the difference in the farms that were closed that little bit earlier, and also in the fields. Even within farm, you would see a difference within fields. South facing, recently reseeded, good soil fertility. They're all the ones that will have the higher, and obviously the numbers of days closed, that they would have the higher covers on them. And I higher suppose growth rates.
Moving out now, like we're at the start of February, grass and grazing conditions, quite good underfoot. It's potentially going to be a great start to the grazing year for a lot of farms. But if we look at that idea, low level of covers as of yet, but I mean, for tracking the amount of grass in the farm and tracking the spring rotation, can you give us advice in terms of how we manage that to make sure that we feed the cow yet we don't run out of grass?
Well, that would be, I suppose, the spring rotation planner. And the objectives, for everybody, is to increase the amount of grass in the diet. It's early grass is really digestible. There's high crude protein in it, and you want to capitalize on that good quality grass that is out there. So the spring rotation planner is the tool to do that. What it'll do is get you out early, condition the sward for later on in the year, and obviously get grass in the diet as quickly as possible, which is very important for the milking cow. And obviously the days of grass, that's going to depend on your soil type, the weather, stocker rate, whether you're measuring grass or not, the infrastructure, and I suppose the farmer mindset as well. The concept of the spring rotation planner, whether you're measuring grass and budgeting it, which we would be recommending, but the simplest way is probably to start with the spring rotation planner, so that the target would be to have a third of the farm grazed by the 1st of March. So simply just divide up your farm into a third for the 1st of March, 2/3 by the 17th of March by Paddy's Day, and then the aim is to graze out the balance then to the end of the first week of April, or it's going to be later, 10 or 14 days later on heavier farms.
And growth rates are picking up, Kay, relative to, that 5-10 kilos, 5 on average that people would have seen across the last 2 months. But it is picking up, but not necessarily relative to what we see mid-season. But in terms of monitoring your spring rotation planner and making sure you're not I suppose, running out of grass. How often should I measure in the month of February and the month of March?
Yeah, as you said, I suppose it's the recommendations. What we would say is do one cover, in January. If you haven't done one, you can still do it before the end of, early February, and maybe do one later on in February. So 2 in February, and then 2 and 3 in March, and then from then on, you'd want to be doing it weekly as growth rates, as you said, as you get the big kick in growth rates, you'd want to be doing it more frequently. But if you can, I know it's a busy time on farms and they're busy with cows calving in the month of February, but try and get 2 covers done. You'd be surprised. Having an opening cover will give you that number of what the growth rate was on your farm over the winter, which is very important to have an idea of, to establish what grass is on the farm, and then do another one later on in February. And if you can, then do 2 and 3 in the month of March.
And if we look to fertiliser then, Kay, maybe a comment from you, is there much slurry gone out on farms across the southeast? There's slurry gone out, and the people who spread the slurry are the people who were under pressure for slurry storage. So it was a case of having to rather than wanting to. And this is great, Emma-Louise, because I see a mindset change in clients, that they realise it's not just, I need to get rid of slurry. They see the value in it, they see the nutritive value, and they've only gone with enough to empty the tanks, that they haven't spread fertiliser or slurry, the same as it was before, any paddock that was bare, But I suppose from an environmental view, that's very important. From the nutrient point of view, we would talk about there's around €29 in value for 1,000 gallons of slurry. So if you've gone with that 2,500 gallons of slurry, you've gone with 20 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, or 16 units an acre, and that's ideal for this time of the year. And let's step that out. So for somebody who has just gone out with a bit of slurry to take the pressure off the tanks, or somebody who has not gone to date, we're in the first week of February now. So let's talk the when, where, how much. Okay.
If you've slurry gone out, as I said, that's around, at 2,000 gallons, around 16 units, maybe some people have 2,500. So that's sufficient nitrogen for that part of the farm that you won't need to spread any chemical fertiliser on that until March. So the recommendations, just to keep it simple, I suppose you're ideally looking at 20 kilos in February and 40 kilos in March. The idea would be that you'd have 60 kilos of nitrogen gone out in your farm by the 1st of April. And that's made up of nitrogen both in the slurry and the chemical fertiliser. So for the portion of the farm, that could be 30% of your farm area, that won't need, if you've gone with the slurry, you'll need to go with your 40 units in March. And that roughly thereabouts will bring you up to the 60 kilos for the 1st of April. For the part of the land that hasn't got slurry, so there's tanks are filling up again. Ideally, I suppose, Emma-Louise, you mentioned, that possibly ground after grazing, if we can get out early, that they would follow with the slurry. So that would be another, 2,500 gallons an acre, 25 kilos of nitrogen, and then follow up on that ground in March with your 50 kilos, and then anywhere that hasn't got any slurry, ideally should get 29 kilos, 23 units in the month of February, and then go along with another 50 kilos or 40 units in the month of March.
And if we then turn our attention to kind of cow metrics or milk metrics for the month of February and into March, a lot of farmers are now considering once a day milking for the first few weeks of lactation. What are the reasons why you would or wouldn't go with once a day milking, Kay?
The main reason to go with it is labour. That's really seen the interest in this in recent years. I see with clients, which, there's always a fear, if I go once a day, am I going to lose production? It's going to cost me money. But in recent years, as labour has become scarce, it's a case of farmers saying, look, I need to do this. I just can't manage it all on my own or with the labour that I have. So there definitely is an increase in my clients on the amount that they're doing once a day in the first couple of weeks of lactation. there was, this Moore Park Labour study there a couple of years that showed that milking time was the most consuming task in the farm. It was taking up 31% of their time. So if you can gain back, a proportion of that time during the busiest months, it should be considered. And Emer Kennedy and her colleagues in Moore Park published research a couple of years ago where they compared once a day versus twice a day in early lactation. Now they would have compared 4, 6 and 8 weeks. What we would be recommending is the 4 weeks. So once it doesn't significantly reduce the total lactation, produce the fat and protein, it wasn't significant. Initially, you will get that 20% reduction in milk yield for that first 4 weeks. But cows will bounce back when they're put back on twice a day. And there was no difference in total lactation. From week 5, cell count was similar. So I suppose, Emma-Louise, you mentioned why wouldn't you do it? That would be part of it. If you have problems with cell counts, it wouldn't be advisable. Because you might end up, cell count will increase while they're put on once a day. So it's from that point of view, it's probably not advisable. But the big benefit, and some farmers would say, look, in the month of February anyway, it's only for that 4 weeks. So it's only the cows that calve in the first 4 weeks. It's not all the herd. It's the reduction isn't significant when you look across the whole herd, and milking time was up to 30% less when cows were milked once a day. So there's definitely food for thought in that one.
That's an interesting point, Kate, because if we think about we are getting more compact in our calving, and a lot of farmers are hitting that 80 to 90% 6-week calving rate. But by the same token, if we do once a day for the first 4 weeks, maybe you're talking 50, 60% of the herd fall into that category, and, not all of those calve in week 1. So it makes an awful lot of sense. When you talk about a high cell count cow or a higher cell count herd are more at risk, again, it is quite logical, because with once a day, you're only clearing the milk out of the udder once a day. So there is potential for a build-up or a growing cell count within individual cows and within the herd. To the labour point, potentially you're spending slightly longer at your milking if you're doing it once a day, but you are cutting out, and it's generally that evening milking event. And in the springtime it is longer. There are certain cows that are being held and milked into a bucket in a lot of cases. So, the huge time saving. To recap on your comment about yield, so there is going to be a penalty for a cow in that month of February. But what you're talking about is no difference across the entire lactation.
Exactly. So from that study, there was, between 22 and 24% reduction in milk yield, and 20 to 23% reduction in milk solids yield. But that once they were turned back on after the 4 weeks to twice a day, there was no significant difference in total milk yield, milk solids yields in the total lactation.
Regardless of milking once or twice a day, in, say, the month of February, how do we set ourselves up best, Kate, to ensure that we have a low cell count in early lactation?
That's a good question. And the periods of greatest risk for infection are going to be, as farmers well know, at dry off, and that's why we put so much emphasis around, treatment and selective dry cow and looking after the herd. So it's at dry off and that 2 to 3 weeks post dry off. And now the 2 to 3 weeks before calving and that first month of pregnancy. So those are the key risk periods for infection, Now, interestingly, Emma-Louise, I had a look at my clients, and in 2022, 20% had an annual cell count over 200,000. In 2023, this is after increasing to 30%. So nearly a third of the clients have had an increase. So that's not just, the clients that I have. When you look at the national figures, cell count had gone through a period for, many years where there was consistent reduction. And unfortunately, it started to move up again with the national cell count in 22 being at 183,000 cells. And there's only 2/3 of suppliers that have that less than 200,000. So it is an area, I think we just don't want to become complacent because the trends, it wasn't as much of a problem as it used to be. So, this is now that period, 2 to 3 weeks pre-calving and the first month of calving are the period where you would, you're heading into a risk of infection. So you would want to take precautions around that.
Why would you say the cell count is rising?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know. Is there any research as to why? Possibly in terms of labour, as herds have got bigger, and this is my own speculation, as herds have got bigger, and we discussed the issue with labour, that maybe there's less time, less attention in milking parlours to be able to, our milking times, back to that whole time spent in the parlour and attention to detail, there's around that. And I suppose, we have had farmers try out selective dry cow and potentially, knock-on effects of where it wasn't managed properly.
And I guess moving forward and being proactive, the selective dry cow is all part of that dry off and the 2-3 weeks post dry off, as you identify as one of the key risk periods. There is a recommendation that we do the early milk recording to catch cows who have, a spike in cell count higher than it was pre-dry off. Like, do you see merit in that? And again, when would you target that first milk recording?
As early as possible. I know my colleagues and Doug Crowley, who you've spoken plenty of times, would say mid to late February, and do at least 6 milk recordings in the year. I suppose, for the minimum is try and have it booked that you have one done by Paddy's Day, depending on your calving pattern, obviously, and how early you start. But you don't wait until all the cows in the herd are calved. Book it in, have it done by St. Patrick's Day at the latest.
And I guess, the reality is the cell check reports provide so much information, and it is to just have a look at it and act. And, so often people are surprised by the key offenders in the herd. And if we trace it back, some of those were an offender in 23, in 22, and even as far back as 21. So, if they're constantly causing problems and potentially spreading to other cows in the herd, we need to think about whether they have a role in the herd going forward.
And coming back to your question on why it has increased, I think possibly as herds have stabilised as well, that with all the expansion, but now as herds have stabilised, guys need to start looking at, okay, who am I carrying and have I been carrying the passengers? Have I been carrying those few offenders that are contributing to a problem? And I do this a good bit with clients where, as you said, you can look at the most recent milk recording, and it's really easy to do on ICBF. If you go into the mastitis SCC report and just select out anybody who's got over 200,000 or whatever criteria you put in, and you can see from all the previous lactation, whether, and particularly now with that first milk recording, how they have calved down. Yes, they could be high now, but is this a new infection, or was that cow carrying high cell count throughout the previous lactation? Had she brought it and it will tell you how effective your dry cow treatment has been. And as you alluded to, whether that cow has a role in your herd, So definitely your advisor can help with that but it's fairly straightforward once you have your recording done to log into ICBF and have a look.
It's a great point, Kay. And, once cows were in calf during the expansion phase on a lot of farms, she was kept. And as you say, there's now an opportunity to seek out cows that maybe, they don't have a future in the herd. I suppose then to turn our attention finally, Kate, to the most vulnerable of our animals on farm, and they would be our calves, lowest immune system, young and, at risk of picking up little problems along the way. But I suppose, they're a big time consumer on farm at the moment, but in reality, they are the future of the herd. And in 2 years' time, these are the the calves that will be calving down. So maybe your top 2 or 3 tips that you would share with clients in terms of promoting healthy calves and good growth rates to ensure that they're calving down in February of 2026.
Well, as the recent calf care events that were held around the country, I think one of the headings was "A good start is half the battle," and that's 100% true. Particularly, as you said, with that calf that has born with absolutely no immunity. There's no passive immunity from the mother. They're dropped in a calving pen, and unfortunately, calving pens aren't always the most hygienic places. So I suppose it's having that pre-calving. Keep the calving area, ensure it's fit for purpose, it's clean, that's a well-drained area, and make sure that the calves are moved as soon as possible after birth to a clean, dry, safe environment, and minimise contact with other adult cows to where they can pick up disease. And obviously then the colostrum, the 1-2-3 rule, feed all the cows with the first milk the cow produces, that colostrum, within 2 hours of birth, and feed 3 litres. The reason being, colostrum quality decreases at the time from calving to milking. So the quality will decrease and the calf's ability to get the immunity is gone within the first 24 hours. So this is where the 2-hour thing comes from, that it's at that stage the calf has the most ability to absorb the immunity from the colostrum. And then from there, you're into looking after the calves. They need good quality whole milk. They should get transition milk, the 2nd to the 6th milking after calving for the 2 days, the first 4 feeds after that colostrum. And then they go on to either whole milk or replacer at 15% of the body weight. So, they could be at 5 litres for the first week, increasing to 6 litres from, when they're a week old. And that's your calf that's 35, 40 kilos. That calves legally need to be fed milk twice a day until they're 4 weeks old, So make sure if you've automatic feeders, and they're a great tool, but make sure they're properly calibrated and there's an appropriate feeding program set up for that. And then the other one is hygiene, Emma-Louise. Absolutely. And I know that you've done research in Moore Park where they looked at it, and, looking at washing and disinfecting and washing calf trucks. But don't forget the likes of the single teat feeder and the stomach tubes. I think they were the ones when they studied it that had the least amount of hygiene. I suppose they could be forgotten.
It's funny you say that, because they're the very first thing calves come in contact with
100%,
at the point of no immunity. And another actual interesting point on when you talk about the calf tube, the stomach tube that a lot of people are feeding the first milk with. An interesting comment from John Mee, who deals a lot with calves and calf mortality, would say that we should be replacing that every year. That the one we used last year is potentially a little bit harsh in terms of the texture of it going down the throat of the calf, and just an interesting add-on point to what you're talking about.
And another one on that is to keep, have a separate set of tools or equipment for when animals are sick. When sick calves, if you do have an instance of sick calves and needing, different, try and have a separate set of stuff that you're not transferring. If one house of pen of calves is sick, that you isolate and you ensure that you have strict hygiene, and from a biosecurity, that you're not spreading the infection from one house to another.
And all of these things are relatively inexpensive in the context of passing on sickness and treatment and your time and the vet call out and the relevant medicines that need to fix the problems. It's a really insightful conversation, and it's great to get some tips and advice. You talk about dealing with a lot of clients, having cows at home yourself, so it's you've your feet on the ground, and you're also talking to a lot of farmers. I think there's quite a checklist here in terms of best practice across management of feed in terms of spring grass, the labour and the health of the cow, and also looking at the calf. Thank you, Kay.
Thanks, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Kay O'Connell for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.